first, what is constructivism? Constructivism is relatively new perspective. Right, the focus, like I said, the focus is on the role of ideas, right? Norms, things that Marx hated, right? He didn't like claims that history is determined by ideas, right? But constructivists argue historical changes are influenced by these ideas and norms. And discourse, this is something new, discourse. Discourse may not be 100% new because even Marx was getting into this discursive analysis, right? He was getting into that. We sort of getting a little bit into this type of Gramscian, right? Marxist discursive analysis. Then Gramsci sort of succeeded, right? That's in the chapter, right? Gramscian ideology, that's discourse. So some commonality with even Marxism. So ideas, norms, discourse. These are key three concepts. And they argue, I mean, in terms of issues, they look rather more closely into these issues, human rights, because they think ideas are more important than material distribution, material power, right? So because of that, the issues they would like to look more carefully at are these issues, human rights, environmental issues, right? They focus on these issues. And in terms of actors, more important, non-state actors more important, right? Non-state actors more important. They critique realists. Reason being, distribution, I mean, these are realist claims. Distribution of military power or economic capabilities. These are the ones that determine international politics or IP, right? They critique this. Constructivists, they negate this, right? These are more important than this. Ideas are more important than this, material power. Social context, very important. Social context. So in terms of level of analysis, social context, social forces, more important in determining international changes. For realists, social context, not important, right? For realists, state is the basic unit of analysis for realists. What happens inside the state, for realists, not important, right? But for constructivists, state is just cover. More important is what's happening inside the state. That's what constructivists think. So social context important, ideas important. How they view conflict and cooperation, this is key, right? Everything comes down to different views on conflict and cooperation. Why wars occur, right? Why countries cooperate, right? Whether conflict is more dominant form of international interactions or cooperation is more dominant form, right? These questions. So realists, liberals, constructivists, Marxists, they have all different views on this. This is most important aspect of, right, how they differ. Again, in terms of how constructivists are different from other perspectives, is basically conflict or cooperation is an outcome of these. Okay? Not military power, not economic distribution, right? What matters, right, for conflict cooperation is different values and beliefs, right? Norms. Okay? So you might not understand exactly how then these ideas, right, result in wars or result in cooperation, right, peace. We look into that, how exactly, right? Constructivists, they have their own sophisticated method of changing ideas into specific outcomes, either war or conflict or peace. We look into that. Wendt, he's the founder of this theory, Alexander Wendt. He's the founder. There might have been some predecessors to Alexander Wendt, but he's the one who put together all the previous, right, like pieces of those theories that can be combined into so-called constructivism. He's the founder. He was the scholar who made previous, disintegrated theories into a very meaningful body of literature. He left many classical statements. He's still alive. When he was very young, he sort of became very famous for this theory. Again, political scientist, but the contribution he made to IPE or IR is that he brought in a lot of sociological perspectives, theories from sociology. He applied that to IR. That's his contribution, right? Wendt, structure has no existence or causal power apart from processes. Here, because structure is the basic concept of realism, right? So he's critiquing realism. Processes are more important than the structure. That's what he's trying to say. Okay? For constructivists, for realists, structure is more important. Structure. The structure in which states are, right, put into, that's more important. Structure is everything. Structure constrains states for realists. But Wendt's, his argument is structure less important than processes. Process is something that make or break, right? Processes, more important. And these concepts in realism, self-help or power politics, are just institutional covers, not essential features of anarchy. Anarchy is, right, key to realism, right? So, hence this really famous, right, decisive statement that forms the character of constructive. Anarchy is what states make of it. Anarchy is, this is a statement from his book. Anarchy is what states make of it. Right? Anarchy is, which is intrinsic to realist world, right? So if you adopt constructivist view, anarchy is not intrinsic to IR, because anarchy is what states make of it, right? Anarchy can change through social processes, like this. Basically, I think, according to Wendt and constructivism, cooperation is more dominant form than conflict, right? Little bit more optimistic about cooperation than realists, and argues the international system, right, IPE or IR, is more orderly than is described by realists. Most of the time, states act in a cooperative manner because of some rules and norms, formal and informal. Because realists, again, they deny these, right? They deny these. But constructivists, they think that these are real and present, right? And states abide by these. States abide by these rules and norms. Because they are social actors. States are social actors, not just political actors, right? Realists, they made a huge mistake in disregarding these deep social structures. And states reflect society's values and beliefs. And even they are predisposed to cooperate, right? From within, not from outside. From within, they are predisposed to work together with other countries, which is very different from realist assumptions. To continue again, hence security community. For realists, they use different terms. Security dilemma. For realists, right? Security dilemma defines international system. But for constructivists, not security dilemma or self-help or anarchy, right? What defines international relations for constructivism is security community, right? Whereby a group of people, right? They share a sense of moral purpose, ideas, and some level of mutual trust possible. This is community, right? Example. You know, everything comes down to how you can derive empirically how ideas, norms, or social processes lead to international changes, right? Empirical evidence, we need that, empirical evidence, examples, right? And, right, many people point to the experience of OSCE in European security system, or to be more exact, the end of the Cold War. When I was at graduate school, we use the end of Cold War. We use that case a lot to prove or disprove realism or liberalism or constructivism. But in the 1990s, it was kind of a fashionable. For scholars, look at the end of the Cold War, right? The Soviet Union collapsed, right? The Berlin Wall came crumbling down. Then the question, what was behind this sudden collapse of the Soviet Union? And Gorbachev, Soviet leaders and European leaders come out shaking hands, right? And speaking in same terms, right? Sharing something. Just a while ago they were enemies, right? Soviet leaders, European leaders. Then how come they suddenly changed their views, right? And that sudden collapse of the Soviet Union and changes in European security system, that went against conventional wisdom of realists. Because according to realists, Gorbachev should not have give up, right? Or European leaders, same. So there was an assumption that realists might have been going wrong on that. Then what else? Then they looked at constructivism. Liberalism, maybe. Liberalism, some role in explaining, but constructivism better than liberalism in explaining the end of the Cold War, sudden end of the Cold War. And at the center of that, OSCE is there. Right? Security Organization, OSCE is there. Again, same thing, right? OSCE, that like a pan-European security institution that initially began as a European organization, but branched off into like a Eastern European and even Russian, right, Soviet, bringing them as members, right? And inside OSCE, unlike realists or unlike liberals, they explain the end of the Cold War from ideational social processes, right? In other words, the way they failed to predict the end of the Cold War was that they were still focusing on realists, right? Still focusing on the states, right? And they were still using terms like anarchy, self-help, right? But if you use norms, ideas, norms within the OSCE, peaceful norms. In other words, Gorbachev and likewise many Eastern European leaders, they were receptive, they were learning, or they were internalizing the norms of peace or common European home, things like that. These norms changes, right? And they internalize it, these norms, even Soviet leaders, right? And maybe to use more constructivist terms, those military leaders, right, or Soviet bureaucrats, Politburo members, they were still looking at European security from realist perspective, right? And they formed the state organization, right? But social groups, social movements within Russia or within Hungary, Czechoslovakia, social groups came out and began to advance peaceful norms. That's social process, which is different from this Politburo-led, right, campaign for anarchy. That's constructivism, right? That led to collapse of the Cold War and the role of OSCE, right? So liberals, they had a hard time predicting, realists again, hard time predicting the end of the Cold War because they overlooked and underestimated these social forces, right? Social voices for peace and cooperation in the European context. Now, let's shift to like a second focus of constructivism, which is there are three elements that define in terms of analytical like a focuses of constructive. There are three focuses. One is so-called TAN, transnational advocacy networks, right? Transnational advocacy networks, TAN. This is one avenue of like a research for constructivism. They study more than anything else. They study transnational advocacy networks, which is TAN. Right? This is the biggest focus within constructivist literature. And what are these? The famous one, Margaret Keck and Catherine Sickink. They wrote a very interesting book from these perspectives. The book what was the title of the book? Kek and Sikink. I think, what's the name of the book? Very famous one. Oh yeah, Activists Without Borders. That's the book, Activists Without Borders. In 1998. Yeah, Activists Without Borders. That's the maybe the first serious study of transnational NGOs. Transnational NGOs. Transnational advocacy networks. Right. So they focus on these level of analysis, like NGOs, trade unions, media, religious groups, social movements. They are the right important people who right change IP international relations. Examples of NGOs that make a difference in the IPE, like a campaign to ban landmines, right, which is cited in the Kek and Sikink book, right. This was very instrumental, right, in changing. Sort of NGOs, those transnational NGOs come out and promote these norms, right? Teaching people, teaching political elites and civil society, circulate these, right, norms throughout society, right? And in this case, norms about, right, banning landmines, right? And also the case of Kimberly-Clark, right? The case of Kimberly-Clark, like abusing, like cutting trees, right? Abusive practice of cutting trees to make these papers, right? That was something that also a lot of international, transnational NGOs were involved in promoting, right? The goal of saving trees, things like that. That's another example. So NGOs like Greenpeace, Natural Resource Defense Council, those were the organizations that were involved in this, right, transnational movement. Second, we have new term here, epistemic communities. These are important, epistemic communities. Many constructivist literature, you can see these terms, epistemic communities or social learning, or norm entrepreneurs, right? Social learning, norm entrepreneurs, or epistemic communities, which means, again, NGOs are important, but the role of professional experts, in certain areas of issues, their role is very critical. So epistemic community literally means global network of experts. Global network of experts. Those are environmental scientists who promote global warming, right, agenda. Arms control experts who study, right, nuclear issues, things like that. Development experts, right, who study poverty issues in the developing world. So those are experts. They make sort of network, right, through which they teach people, right, and teach political elites, form opinions. That's important, very important role. Best example, Montreal Protocol. Montreal Protocol that was instrumental in promoting the importance of ozone layer depletion, right? Ozone layer depletion due to CFCs. This is the best example because this is something that achieved most achievements, even compared to other climate change agenda, right? So behind that, they are very important. Environmental scientists, they made a huge contribution, right, in promoting this ozone depletion agenda. Next, so first, transnational NGO. Second, professional network, experts, network of experts. Thirdly, international organizations are important. International organizations. So IOs. IOs are also instrumental. In terms of shaping, IOs can help shape, teaching political elites in terms of identity first, right? Like, the question of identity means what a state is, right? What a state is. This is the question. And in terms of interest, what you want. So the first question is who you are, right? Telling different developing countries, right? Asking different developing countries, you first understand who you are, right? Then next, what you want. And then finally, policy, right? What you should do. So these three essential questions for any country, these IOs can help these developing countries particularly, right? Shape these three essential questions. So again, identity, interest, policies. Two important processes, discourse and social interactions. So IOs help developing countries, right, shape these through discourse and social interactions, right? Social interactions meaning IOs, not just simply talking to political elites or bureaucrats alone. IOs get civil society involved in come up with these questions. That's social interactions. Discourse, we'll get to that, what discourse means, right? So these are two key processes, discourse, social interactions. Not through, right? Not through military force or sanctions or conditionality or other material payments, right? This is for realists or liberals. This is for constructivists. And this is how constructivists make a difference. And this is past practice. I mean, in terms of engaging developing poor countries, right? That's what I'm saying. And for developing countries, most important questions are these three questions: identity, interest, policies, right? Again, another scholar, Martha Finney-Moore. Again, another great constructivist scholar. Martha Finnimore. She discusses how ICRC, International Committee on Red Cross, how ICRC shaped norms, facilitating norms about sort of a behavior, state behaviors during war, right? And this norm, from humanitarian perspectives, right? During war, you know, civilians must be protected, right? These norms about, right, protecting civilians, right? During war, this ICRC was hugely instrumental in founding these norms. So Martha Finnimore discusses this. World Bank and the UN, again, also instrumental in spreading the norms of poverty alleviation, poverty eradication, and the Millennium Development Goals. So according to constructivists, unlike from realist perspectives, the UN might not be weak or ineffective. UN is very powerful from this perspective because UN is spreading norms. That's how UN is changing states' behaviors. And also the UN was very important, playing very important role also in terms of gender equality, norms about gender equality. So poverty, gender equality, World Bank, UN, very important role. Right? That's Finnimore's book, like sort of highlights these points. So she's in the constructivist school. And this is the point. States are constrained by norms. Most important point. States are constrained by norms. To recap a little bit, okay, you need to remember these. There are 4 important concepts and analytical tools of constructivists. To summarize what I have just said so far. Number 1, ideas, values, norms, and identities are socially constructed, not states imposed. Okay? Not states imposed. Internally derived. Socially derived or constructed. This is key concept. Number 1, key concept. You need to, no matter what, you need to remember this. Ideas are socially constructed. Very key concept, right? Second, ideas are forces, okay? Powerful forces. What this means is that ideas can change the world. Ideas are not just ideas, okay, in the laboratory. Ideas are powerful, transformative powers. Right? I want to make this very clear. Powerful sources of change. Third, conflict cooperation, 2 phases of international relations, right? What determines this? Values and beliefs determine this. Again, this is the third essential concept. I mean, you must not believe this 100%, right? How a person can say, right, the world is changed simply by ideas. This is a very dangerous idea. Right? If you believe this, someone who promotes a very romantic, a very popular ideology or idea, which we see in history, right? Like a socialist revolution or neoliberal revolution in the contemporary time. These are all, I think, based on this idea. Very revolutionary, radical ideas. And subject to a lot of mistakes. Right? Next, finally, change is explained by, again, value changes. In other words, the end of the Cold War, right? Significant shift in the system, right? End of the Cold War is due to value changes, right? Gorbachev changed his mind. That's value changes. That's how the Cold War ended. That's changes. Changes. So these four concepts and tools you need to remember no matter what. Now, first get to, in terms of some methodological aspects of constructivism, how then ideas lead to changes, there must be some methodological aspects of it, right? They are not just brag about this, they have all the nuts and bolts, how ideas lead to changes. Let's look at that first. First, processes are important. Processes, okay? In terms of, how ideas are powerful, ideas become powerful through processes. Like, right? The key is how to explain changes in the IP, right? Framing comes first. Framing. Framing is important function in the processes. Framing literally means the ability to define what the problem is. That's framing, right? What the problem is first. This question, the global problem, right? What is causing the problem? Right? What is causing the problem? Or who is involved in the problem? Right? Or what the consequences are? Right? What are the solutions to the problem? All these. It all depends on the framing processes. Framing processes. Framing processes are done through several things. Languages, reports, propaganda, storytelling. These are key in framing processes. More on this. Everything is political construct. Okay, in the framing, everything is political construct, meaning political constructs are lenses that focus on a particular side of a story. So, like for instance, a complex global problem, right? You put a very complex global problem, such as global warming, North Korean nuclear or missile problem, right? Or Islamic terrorist threat, right? Everything. A very complex problem, you need to put it sort of as opposed to another, right, perspective. This is how constructivists see every problem. Right? There must be multiple lenses, right, through which we see these global problems. What matters is who influences the global problem to constructivists, right? And how we should behave toward the problem, right? How we come up with the solution to the problem. The example of biodiversity issue, which is a global problem, right? The way constructivists see this biodiversity problem, okay, is different from realists or liberals. Like first, the conventional wisdom about biodiversity was biodiversity is due to disempowerment or corruption, local corruption in the developing countries. But this is framed by someone. Okay, so constructivists encourage alternative perspective, like this. Biodiversity may be due to consumption patterns in advanced countries, right? So this view, this conventional view, was framed by certain group, right? So constructivists encourage this sort of alternative lens. War in Afghanistan, same thing. War in Afghanistan, right? Two different views this textbook discusses. One, the first view is, war in Afghanistan sort of worsens because of what? What's the previous? Worsens because the groups of warlords, different warlords, right? They are corrupted. They are corrupted through drug trafficking and all that, right? They are bad guys. These local warriors are behind the worsening of Afghanistan war, right? But the other view, alternative view that constructivists bring into this is Afghanistan war is sort of a reflection of local resistance to American soldiers, right? Or African resource wars, right? Blood diamonds, so-called blood diamonds in Africa. Same thing, right? Constructivists, these are good subjects for constructivists because African resource war can be framed very different ways, can be looked at from very different perspectives, right? Realists, they sort of, right? Realists presented sort of distorted perspectives on Africa or on Afghanistan or whatever, right? Problematization. Again, this is part of the processes. And this process of problematization is to track down how problems get defined as problems. This is a very critical process. How global problems get defined, right? Because basic assumption here is these problems, right? All these different problems are not they don't exist just out there, right? Right? People talk according to using their term, these global problems are talked into existence. That's how they describe, right? There are no problems that naturally existent, right? Right. Every problem is talked into existence. So perception is important, right? Problems are not just out there, right? Important aspect. And states, they have a handle on in terms of choosing, right? Who they identify with or against, right? So that enemies have to be defined. Do you remember President Bush, right? In confronting terrorist wars, he said, you know, you are either with us, right, or with the enemy, right? So because there are no laws in international society regarding who is enemy, right? There are no laws. There are no judges, right? Everything is, using again constructivist terms, everything is just discursive. Everything depends on, right? Who defines enemy, right? So let me conclude by saying, by emphasizing this, we make enemies or friends, right? Or we make global problems through these important things: discursive, deliberative process, right? So global problems go through this process of discursive and deliberative process. And these processes, more importantly, are influenced by culture, history, and beliefs. Then I think you will have a very different idea about state interests, state identity, right? Or even anarchy. Whether or not the international system is anarchic, you'll have a very different idea if you follow these steps, right? I think this is important. Culture, history informs this process. Like for instance, when America defines Taliban as enemies, okay? America did it through a deliberated process of defining Taliban as the enemy. America was making a choice depending on American culture, depending on American history. So, according to this, defining the Taliban as enemies might be very different if you have a different history. Like countries like China, or who might have been, neighbors to maybe Afghanistan, they might have a totally different views on who is the enemy, who is the friends. Right? That's how constructivists open very different alternative views on many different global problems. Again, social process, bring these social actors into this deliberative, process, very important. Right? I think this is the end of today. Half an hour earlier, a little bit. You go home and go back to what we have covered so far. Lots of things tossed out. Come back Tuesday and finish up the other half. Then we'll get to quiz on Thursday. Okay, chapter 1 through chapter 5.